Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's session. I'll be your moderator and chair. My name is Yalda Hakim and I'm a lead world news presenter at Sky News. The title of this session is Media, Power and the Search for Truth in the Age of Distrust. And for me, that immediately brings up phrases like accountability, transparency and impartiality. The defining issue of our time is the war in Gaza, and I think it's always crucial to highlight that 2 years on, we're still relying on the bravery and sacrifice of our Palestinian colleagues inside Gaza because of the international media being banned from entering independently. In many ways, our new media landscape provides audiences with more freedom of choice, more opportunity for accountability, and more transparency than ever before. But is this decentralization democratizing our news consumption, or is it moving us towards more division and distrust amongst each other? I sit here today as a representative, perhaps the only true representative on this panel, of traditional broadcast media, a format we're increasingly told is a dying breed. I host an evening show on Sky News where every night for the last 2 years we've covered the war in Gaza, Sudan, Ukraine, the turmoil in US politics and beyond. I discuss with my editors daily how we stay on top of stories and bring them to as wide an audience as possible. How do we hold those responsible for such death and destruction to account and provide context and clarity to our audiences? I'm finding myself talking far less about TV audiences and much more about global engagement. Some of my guests on the panel here have served as shining examples of how to successfully achieve that. And I'm delighted that we'll be hearing from them directly in a moment. But as we move into an era where social media platforms are the new vehicles of news and information, what are the opportunities and what are the risks that we face? Now, just to introduce our panel today, Nika Soon-Shong, publisher of Dropsite News, Neil Patel, co-founder and CEO of Tucker Carlson Network, Rory Stewart, Rest is Politics co-host, and Alex Bruesewitz, CEO of X Strategies and an advisor to President Trump and a commentator. Nika, I'm going to start with you because you really are the new kid on the block. You've received a huge amount of success in a very short period of time. And just a few days ago, I saw a sort of post that you put out on X, which was a clip of a senior reporter, Ryan Grimm, on the Steve Bannon podcast with the comment, "Flood the zone." What did you mean by that, and how are you adopting that strategy?
So that clip was actually Steve Bannon calling for his audience to subscribe to Dropsite News because of Ryan's reporting and his ability to be, as Steve Bannon said, a warrior for truth. And what does that mean for independent media? It means that there's an opportunity to rewrite some of the assumed divides and actually to realize that new media can help to bridge a failure of trust that cuts across them. So for example, the majority of our audience are young, they're digital first, but that doesn't mean that they're failing to read. Our investigations are incredibly dense. We only publish stories if there's something new that you wouldn't be able to find somewhere else. And we publish stories that connect the dots across the different fields of power that together combine to make the inequities that we see, whether it's America's role in foreign wars, whether it's what's happening domestically, what's happening in Gaza. And so when we say flood the zone, it means that this is a common challenge and there are common actors that the left and the right are paying attention to and need to be calling out and calling to account.
Are you saying that traditional media is not doing that or no longer doing that?
I think there's an absolute failure to call into account elected officials, and there's a partisan divide that's governing, editorial lines. And I think some of that has to do with the leadership of legacy media, and some of that has to do with the structures of reporting and the failure to really return to the basics, which is fact-checking, hiring on-the-ground reporters that are able to corroborate sources, investigating, being a trusted place where people can leak documents, and really investigating the world around us and helping people make sense of it. When we're instead contributing to this echo chamber, I think it becomes tiresome for audiences, but also it becomes a bad business model.
So did you find by saying that on and posting that on Steve Bannon's podcast, which is the polar opposite of what you guys are doing at Dropsite, that was reaching out across the divide to people with a different ideology, and what was the impact of that?
I in a way resist the idea that it's a polar opposite from audiences that turn to Steve Bannon to help them, who feel left out of discourses that are determined in coastal elite cities, and in print. I think that actually we can see this in, for example, the election of Zoran Mamdani and his press briefing with Donald Trump, where there's a common language where we feel that elite media isn't addressing concerns of everyday people. And even worse, it's asking us to defy the evidence of our eyes and ears. And we have the ability to understand the world around us and to understand the problems. And so if we unveil the real actors behind some of these, behind some of the corruption that we see, I don't think that's partisan at all.
Alexa, I'm going to bring you in because you quite successfully use social media to get your political message and, when you're consulting or commentating across. Are you increasingly finding that is a more useful medium for you rather than traditional media?
Especially when you're talking about President Trump. In America, for legacy media, we have 93% negative news coverage. If you look at ABC, NBC, MSNBC, which just had a terrible rebrand. They call themselves MS Now. It's a terrible logo, same stupid anchors. But for legacy media, it's 93% negative. And so why would we possibly think that we'll have a fair shot at engaging with these people? And so fortunately, we have President Trump. I tell him he's the #1 influencer in the world, because he is. Not only does he have hundreds of millions of social media followers, but he drives the conversation every single day. But we don't need the traditional media to get a message through. We can circumvent them. They were very unhappy about that. We circumvented them in 2016 using a Facebook strategy that was never seen before. Hillary Clinton, who I think is here, I'm sorry about that, but she spent hundreds of millions of dollars on television advertisements in the 2016 election. We spent much less than that on targeted Facebook ads. We were effective at it. And so we took money away from the cable news networks. They weren't too thrilled. And after we won, the Democrats in America, they did everything they could to start censorship. And that's when terms like misinformation and disinformation started coming out, and it was coming from the legacy media. And then in the 2020 election, they rigged the election by censoring conservative content, banning President Trump's message from the internet. And then in 2024, I think in large part to Elon Musk purchasing X, there was freedom on the internet again, and our ideas won. And so we absolutely prefer social media over legacy media.
You talk there about legacy media pushing out terms like disinformation and misinformation, but surely you know that you're dealing with that on social media platforms as well.
I think the most dangerous misinformation and disinformation over the years has actually come from legacy media. One prime example that I point to is the Russian collusion hoax, a terrible lie that fractured a relationship between two world powers. There was no evidence ever about Russian collusion, but CNN and MSNBC and all of the actors I named earlier, they all lied and said that President Trump colluded with Russia. There was no facts, and they knew it was a lie, but they pushed it anyway. Just recently, we learned that the BBC just totally doctored President Trump's words about January 6th. And so for years, people all across the world thought President Trump incited an insurrection. He didn't. We knew he didn't. Everybody that was honest knew he didn't, but the media said it anyway. And so these are big lies that have major impact. And so I'm less concerned about a meme on the internet than I am about the legacy media and all of their power pushing lies that actually have consequence.
So it doesn't bother you when something goes viral and it might be totally false information?
Give me an example.
Okay, I'll give myself as an example. In the last few days, a deep fake was created of me, an AI deep fake, following an interview I did, which could have pushed two nuclear powers, Pakistan and India, to the brink of war. I mean, the defense minister of Pakistan was commenting on the deep fake as though it was real. Indian media picked it up as though it was real. that could be potentially incredibly dangerous, and it was retweeted millions of times on social media. Even when we tried to claw it back, it sort of spread like wildfire. How do you come back from something like that? Whereas on my show and on legacy media, we were able to curb that and give the right information that interview was false.
Yeah, the rise of AI, that will be something that we will have to deal with. That's very dangerous. And the president has actually spoken out about that. He said, what if this happens? And so we have to do better at combating that. But that's not the main focus. Like MSNBC and for example, I said that I have questions about the 2020 election. I said, I do not think that the 2020 election in America was conducted in a free and fair manner. The cable news network said that Alex Bruesewitz is spreading misinformation and disinformation. They're saying my opinions and my beliefs are misinformation. They're not too concerned about the deep fakes like that you're talking about. They like to nitpick the truth. They like to control what people's opinions can be on the internet. And that's why the term misinformation and disinformation comes from. It's not for serious matters, it's for just political disagreements. And so I do think we need to take a look at how we can better, I don't know if regulate's the right word. Our people don't like the word regulate, but we should probably figure out how we make sure that those deep fakes talking about nuclear war don't get out there.
I want to bring you in, Rory, because of course you host the biggest podcast, The Rest is Politics, in the UK. It's not a natural space for you. I mean, you come from the political world, but you're looking at a sort of a new form of a new media, frankly, through podcasting. But I just want to pick up on what Alex has said there, that mainstream media, especially in America, are more focused on he's saying disinformation and peddling disinformation when they're questioning things like the 2020 election, whereas you don't necessarily get that kind of discourse on social media and you can freely discuss these things. I just want to get your response to that.
Well, I think going from being an elected politician to being a podcaster is pretty terrifying, because you suddenly realize that you are in a world where the line between truth and entertainment is very, very thin. Right? A lot of the time when we are engaging on social media, when we are dealing with people who are being challenging, it's quite unclear to me whether what we're doing is thinking that's a really good true point, or whether we're sort of laughing and thinking, oh, that's quite amusing and outrageous, what they just said, right? In fact, one of the things that President Trump feeds off is that sense that he can say things which are genuinely shocking and destabilizing, and people will sort of laugh and go, well, isn't that great? He did something extraordinary, right? Nobody's ever seen a visiting Ukrainian president insulted like that before. Nobody's ever suggested we invade Denmark, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And the question is, how have we created a universe where the line between truth and entertainment has become so blurred? And the reason why that's important for me as a politician is that our democracies are predicated on knowing the truth. Right? You cannot, and I agree, not everybody in this room is very interested in democracy, but insofar as there are still a few people left in the world that are still committed to the idea of liberal democracy, the idea is we have to be able to vote with some idea about what these guys are doing and what they've done. We need some idea that when they've promised to do something, they deliver it. If we create a world in which it is entirely impossible to have any common consensus on what they've actually done, what the figures are, what's getting done, it's impossible for our systems to operate at all. I mean, this is becoming an existential threat. What do I mean by that, right? If we don't know actually what the data is on what's happening to the economy, how do they know whether they're performing? If they say that they are following the law and they're not following the law, if they say that their intention is one thing and its intention is another, it becomes a system in which lack of trust leads to chaos, and chaos leads to authoritarian rule.
I'm going to come to Neil in a second, but I just want to, Alex, you're shaking your head. I just want to get your response.
Well, I think, President Trump is the promises made, promises kept president. I think he has measurable results that he can point to and say that he delivered on those. And so I think authoritarian rules happening in England where they're censoring speech.
Challenge you on this.
Please.
Listen, I get you're a good friend of President Trump, but how do you, when you look in the mirror, know whether you are propagandizing for the president? And when do you look in the mirror and say, am I absolutely sure that that is entirely true, what I've just said about President Trump?
Because oftentimes I'm in the rooms, I'm paying attention to what's happening.
So give us an example of something that he said he would do and that he didn't do, just to show that you're able to see the other side of the picture.
Pardon?
Give us an example of something that he said he'd do that he didn't do, so you can show that you can see the other side of the picture.
He said that he would arrest Hillary Clinton, and she's in the Doha Forum instead of jail.
Okay, so how does that track with he's the guy that always does what he says?
Well, on that I have a disagreement.
Okay, well, we can come back to that, and we can have a side panel about discussions around President Trump and his discussions. But Neil, I want to bring you in, because we can see there just what's happening there in that conversation between Alex and Rory, how polarized things are in terms of beliefs and ideologies. And, you know, Rory and Alex are in this new media space, and both sort of questioning the other in terms of their beliefs. At the Tucker Carlson show network, you know, the YouTube channel that you have, you're trying, just as Dropsite is, to bring in all sorts of voices. And you guys have come under flack and attack for that.
We have. You know, the current state of affairs is not perfect, but is it better than the prior state of affairs? I think undoubtedly yes. The answer to all this is actually what you started witnessing here on stage. The answer is the free market of ideas. People debate. And then the public can decide. They can watch and they can say, this guy's saying it's X, this guy's saying it's Y, and they can assess and weigh the arguments themselves. The alternative that we used to rely on is fundamentally flawed in theory and certainly proved to be fundamentally flawed in practice. And that was that there's this subgroup of super perfect people who are so objective that they can step back and in a completely fair way call balls and strikes and decide everything. And I think that just is a fundamentally flawed view of mankind. And I think in practice, if you saw what happened in the media in the last 10 or so years, that has certainly failed. So the solution is always more speech, more discussion, and then people can decide.
Do you think that's happening right now? I mean, we do also are grappling with cancel culture, for example, as a result.
We are. I think it is happening in an imperfect way. I'm not saying it's great, but I do think it's an improvement. There's mass amounts of information. Curious people can go out and they can find information from so many sources now. So yes, I think it's better than it was, but it's chaotic right now. There's no doubt about it.
How do you rein in that chaos? Or you don't?
I think there are tools. I mean, for example, on the deep fakes, I certainly think, again, just going along with the theme, that the answer is not to restrict speech, but more speech. It would certainly seem reasonable for someone to create some quick alert system for deepfakes so people could go and just look it up. Is that a deepfake or not? So these sorts of, and by the way, I would guess somebody already is doing that, and if not, it'll happen soon. So there are, you know, free market of ideas type reactions that I think certainly are developing or will develop in the future, and that's the only other option is regulating speech, and I just don't think that's a good option.
Rory?
Just quickly, I mean, I think, look, there's something very tempting about the Neil and Alex view, which is that we just open it up and we have a free, fair debate. But the reality is that this isn't the way that people consume their social media. They're not sitting at the Doha Forum, listening to 5 people having a calm discussion and scratching their heads, and Alex said this, and Rory said this, and, you know, who do I agree with, and what are the facts, and now I'm going to check whether it's a deep fake or not. This isn't the universe we live in. This is entertainment, it's outrage, it's polarization. These are algorithms that feed us. You know, most of us in this room are profoundly sympathetic to the Palestinian side on Gaza. We will see on our feeds news about that. Other friends of mine who are Israelis will see feed which is almost entirely on the Israeli side of that context. There is very, very little happening in practice where people are actually seeing both sides played out in a lovely way as we are on this stage. And I think and that's one of the reasons why trust in media, trust in institutions is plummeting. If what you were saying, Neil, was right, trust would be rising. But trust is plummeting. People don't feel that they can trust things more as they open up.
Well, more people now are trusting social media than broadcast news. So the trust has dropped in general, but the trust of traditional media is the lowest of all the trust levels. So I think, again, imperfect, but better than what we had.
Nika, do you feel that that is one of the reasons why you guys had to create DropSite to fill the gap, you know, especially when it came to issues like Gaza, the Middle East, because you felt that the kind of coverage that people were looking for was just not there?
Absolutely, and I'll say an added dimension again is returning to our capacity for moral outrage. What if actually we are seeing the exact same thing and losing our capacity to have a baseline sense of humanity? You know, sometimes it's made to feel overly complicated or ideological or polarized, but, you know, things that are very simple are made to feel complicated. Children should live, hospitals should exist, basic human rights should be had by all. These are things that have previously been agreed upon, but are being, you know, relitigated in the media. And I think that it's really important for young generations to really challenge that, and I think we see that happening.
Alex, do you feel that, you know, social media platforms are deliberately pushing controversial issues that will cause people to be outraged, and that leads to chaos? Just the point that Rory is making on this, because we do see, you know, the kind of sometimes fake news that carries on social media causing harm to people.
I think it certainly depends on the platform, and I don't disagree with Rory that people see two different worlds on their algorithms and their feeds. That is why I personally like to follow many people on the left, so I see what they're talking about and see many of their foolish ideas, but I still see them. I think it's important. But I think X in particular can feel a little bit more angry at times. But if you go on TikTok and on Instagram, for example, it's a lot more friendly, loving content. You know, the way that we post on the president's, you know, social media pages on X and on TikTok and Instagram, it's way different. More focused on news content on X and more focused on fun content on those other platforms. You know, for example, our Team Trump TikTok account reaches about 190, 200 million people every single month. And our content on there is like President Trump getting off the plane in Malaysia and being greeted by great dancers, and he dances to the YMCA with them. And so we don't like to add fuel to the fire. And so I think some of these, I think a lot of people who pay attention to politics, like many of you here at the Doha Forum, you're much more active on X than you are on the other platforms, and that's why it can feel a little bit, you know, angrier at times. But, you know, it just depends on what platform you're on.
And on that point that you follow people on the left to get a sense of what they're saying, do you sometimes think, I see their perspective and actually it's probably closer to mine?
Yes, sometimes, and it also helps me improve messaging and see if there's a way that, if there's a certain policy that I support, how can I message that better to maybe bring people in? And I'm going to follow Rory now. I don't know if Rory likes me very much, but I think he's a nice guy.
I just don't dislike you, Alex. Right. I'm profoundly worried by a lot of your ideas.
Right. Well, I think you're a nice guy. I can
love the man and dislike the ideas.
That's okay. I think you'll like my ideas if you spend more time with me.
That's a challenge, Rory.
I think there's another issue here, which is, look, we can all kick legacy media, but and look, the BBC did something unforgivable when it spliced that speech. But it's also true that we are all parasitic on legacy media. We use it, and without it, it would be very, very difficult for us to operate at all. I feel actually very guilty as somebody with a podcast. A lot of my information is coming from journalists employed by organizations whose advertising revenues are collapsing. They're dependent on stringers on the ground who speak the local languages and who are producing the information. We're not, as a group of us on this stage, or maybe you're the exception, but three of us at least, are able to talk about what's happening in the world, do our posts, in large part because there are thousands of other unsung people in the legacy media trying to produce the basic information. I mean, we don't know what's happening in Libya. We don't really understand the details of what's happening on the Chad-Sudan border. It's more and more difficult to get reporting out of Russia and China. And the only people left doing that, I'm afraid, are these organizations that we're beating up with all their flaws. And I agree, they've got many flaws. It's the BBC, it's the Wall Street Journal, it's the New York Times that have actually got the stringers on the ground.
Neil, did you want to pick up on that point?
I definitely agree that we need people going out, asking questions of politicians, holding them accountable, going to war zones, filming what's happening. So yes, we need that. I also think the legacy media can play a role in that by, again, putting out their information, but others are doing the same. If you look at what's happening on the ground in Gaza, that's not legacy media giving us the information. Those are citizen journalists getting the information out, and without them, we would have very little idea of what is happening. So it's a combination of all this, again, going into this marketplace of ideas, and then people can judge. I see both sides of it. I run the Tucker Carlson Network. I also run the Daily Caller, which is a news site in Washington, D.C., accredited at the White House, accredited in Congress. And we exist because the legacy media would go to press conferences and ask questions that are of almost no interest to an average American citizen. So we also press politicians the way the legacy media would, but we press them from a different perspective, from the perspective of the interests of an average American. So you need people performing that function. There's just no doubt about it. And podcasts wouldn't have anything to talk about if no one performed that function. So it is important, but there are many, on the stage right now, we have two who are doing it. So there are startups doing the same thing.
On the point of Gaza journalists, and it's true that they're, we honored them at the beginning of this session by talking about their bravery, but many of them are also being, many of them are being hired by mainstream legacy media to be able to get the word out. So that is actually happening. They're not solely relying on the social platforms. They're being hired by big media organizations who are then, helping them platform their stories.
Sure, yeah. Again, I'm not against, I'm for as many people covering everything as possible. What I didn't like was the old system, which was a very small group of very large news companies deciding for people what's happening. And again, I think it's flawed in concept, and I think in practice it's proven to be totally broken.
Yeah, I'll say almost a quarter of our budget goes towards hiring Gazan contributors as reporters and as colleagues, not just as stringers, and that's incredibly important. But to this point of this aspect of the conversation, I think there's a dangerous conflation between journalism, investigations, and media. And when we think about the rise of social media, that can be driven by journalistic content that can be shared and discussed and disseminated. And really what we do at Dropsite is sticking to our core competency, which is the ability to investigate where others can't, and the willingness to take on risky stories where others won't or won't be able to. And so I think there's always going to be a role for that, and it's going to be construed as one way or the other, depending on the story at hand. But ultimately, what we're proving is that there's actually a great demand from readership for this. So there's no paywall, yet 30% of our revenue is from readers who contribute $100, $200 annually because they want to support our operation, because they want to support this kind of information living out there and ultimately hitting their social media feeds.
Do you think you'll eventually have to put up a paywall?
No, we're committed to no paywall. I think also it's about accessibility, and there's other forms of revenue, but right now we're really driven by readership support.
I just want to ask you, Neil, a question about polarizing figures and controversial figures, because you recently platformed Nick Fuentes, which got a lot of on the Tucker Carlson show.
We did?
Did you guys? Yeah, you did. I'm like, wait, I saw that, right? Now you've made me question the truth. But you recently did platform him. There was a lot of backlash. Do you think that, frankly, platforming these types of figures is a good thing or a bad thing? Obviously you guys did it because you think it's a good thing, but it did kind of, put views out there that many people thought disrespectful and shouldn't have been out there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my answer is I fundamentally oppose the use of the word platform as a verb. I don't think interviewing somebody means endorsing their views. I think you should interview all kinds of people. And I think anyone who wants to see that interview, watch that interview, can make up their own mind on it. But a figure like that was growing. He was growing and growing, and is growing and growing in the American political world and media ecosystem. So when someone becomes that big, that they have millions of followers, to try to get under the hood and see what he's all about, I think is like a totally normal function for a media organization.
I guess, the criticism is that perhaps you weren't as tough as, say, a broadcast journalist in questioning and challenging some of his ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest you watch the interview. I think there's this faux toughness a lot that's expected just to show that you're a good person. And what does it get? It gets someone to be defensive and to totally close up, or to give you just memorized talking points. So if someone thinks that's the right way to get to the truth, that's the right way to get to someone to see what the interviewee is all about, then they can go for it with that style. I think the style that we used actually ends up being a lot more informative to the public.
I've got about sort of 7 to 8 minutes left, and I want to open the floor up to any questions that you may have. I don't know if there's a mic going around. Yeah. Maybe if we start here, Jamal, with you first, and then we can go to the back. I might take 2 or 3 questions because of the short time.
Thank you very much.
Is it on?
All right, there's a couple of things first. I think there's a big elephant, or 2 big elephants in the room that I think I haven't touched upon. When we're talking about trust and not trust. Sorry. So there's 2 big elephants in the room.
Hold it like that.
All right. One is when we're talking about trust and the shift from legacy media. The reason why that mistrust is there is because those who are in power and in control of that legacy media would filter what would be on the screens and what not, either before or after. Platforms are doing the same thing with the algorithms, and either negatively by shadow banning or in a positive way by flooding, as Musk is doing with X, with things that are in line with his politics. And whilst it's very encouraging to see new frontiers being opened in the digital platform, the idea that somehow by default is going to be a lot more free and fair just isn't true. And we've seen it now, particularly in this part of the world, in the Arab world, with Gaza and with Palestine and with other things, where there's been a very clear attempt to silence that narrative. And I think we need to be a bit consistent, and I would love to hear from the right of this panel. We need to be consistent when we're talking about freedom of expression and a free press and a free market for ideas, that is genuinely free. We can't suddenly have anything that isn't. On that, and just the second elephant in the room that hasn't been addressed actually, is the experience that was set out by an entity that was founded back in 1996, Al Jazeera, actually. And I think, and I'm not saying this just because...
Full disclosure.
Full disclosure is one of
Al
those
Jazeera.
who are there from Al Jazeera. But actually, there is a network that was set up based on the opinion and the other opinion. We have a real-life example of a network that was based on stringers on the ground, that didn't have parachute journalists coming in, that wasn't succumbing to the big money that was coming from advertisers as the cable networks were in the US, and was able to set a news agenda that was closer to the people of the region that it was serving. And in that, I think there is a lot that can be learned in
Jamal,
American
your question,
media.
'cause I've
that
got
can be. So what I want to
2
ask is very
minutes.
quickly.
Yeah.
Number one, with regards to the algorithms, what are you planning to do to ensure that that doesn't
Sure.
clamp down on opinions? And number 2, why is there no reference to actual journalism that has been experienced
in the
beyond
past.
West?
Okay, and I'll take one there. If you could make it brief, please, because we've got 5 minutes and one
With a
here.
question mark.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Professor Andrew MacLeod, King's College London. The other side of the coin is, are we doing enough work to increase civics education as part of our communities, given that the algorithms are sending you a conflation of what you're already interested in? Do we, A, teach our citizens to be critical in their thinking enough? And maybe for mainly Alex, if we did have a critical thinking population, would you prefer your audience to be questioning you critically, or would you prefer them to be sheep and just send your stuff out and multiply your message?
Great, thank you. And I'll just take one more here, and then we'll have to take it back to the panel, unfortunately. Yeah, just get an answer in a second. I'm just going to take one more question, and then we'll go over to the panel.
I'm a journalist. I work in Washington. According to the narrative that I hear from this panel, I am part of the legacy media, and I think it's not fair.
Who are you with?
I'm a freelancer right now, but I used to work for an international news channel. And Alex, no matter how many times you repeat that there was a Greek election, there is no evidence of that. But anyway, in my question, in my point, you call yourself independent. And I think the media is independent if the journalists ask questions independently. So you don't have the adjective of independent because you're new. That is applied to the job of the journalist, not the news outlet that you represent. So my question, because I know, I see your face.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that what you are reporting is true, and when you make a mistake, you correct and you apologize? Because the big media correct and apologize, and then when they apologize, everybody signal them and say, you made a mistake.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if the new media is able to do that.
Neil, I'll get
Thank
you to start on that, and then we'll take the other questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, what we're doing is so much more fundamentally honest than the old system, because Tucker is our host. Everybody knows Tucker's views. He espouses on his views every day, and he doesn't pretend that he's coming at this as some completely objective creature. The mode of the so-called journalist who's just so fair that he's completely unbiased is a fiction. It's always been a fiction. So there's an inherent honesty in the way we're doing it that I think is just fundamentally better.
I'll just jump in. This guy laughed when he said there's an inherent dishonesty. I mean, you just stood up and you're very confident saying there is no evidence of a rigged election. Are you familiar with a guy named Hunter Biden? Well, if you're not familiar, he was Joe Biden's son. And he liked to have relations with prostitutes and film it and put it on a laptop. He liked to do crack cocaine and film it and put it on a laptop. And everybody in the legacy media, they said that is something called Russian disinformation. It wasn't Russian disinformation. That was a true laptop. Nobody in the media covered it. And if you posted about it on social media, you got censored and lost your account. And so after the election, it came out and they said, if you knew that laptop was real, would you have voted for Joe Biden? 20% of people who voted for Joe Biden said they wouldn't have done so. So if you're talking about just one aspect, that's called rigging an election.
Rory,
so thank you for that.
Are you going to respond, and then I'll get the
Okay,
critical
no,
question.
one of my final points, I know we're coming to the end. Listen, I think in the end, we still have to try to have a standard of truth. There has to be some idea of what the truth is. Without the truth, nothing functions. And all I'm asking, doesn't matter whether you're the legacy media, or you're the new media, or you're Tucker Carlson, you're Alex, or you're me, we have to apologize when we get it wrong. We have to admit our mistakes. We have to try to find out what the facts are. We have to admit our own weaknesses. We have to display humility. We have to be aiming for the truth. We may miss it again and again and again. But if we don't aim for it, we are all doomed.
On that note, I'm going to bring this panel to an end. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank my panelists.